Hey guys, it's Alex the Real Mr. Robinson here. Welcome back to part 5 of my chronological recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe leading up to Avengers Endgame. And today we're taking a look at The Incredible Hulk, the movie that most people seem to disregard as actual canon in the MCU, which it actually is. But it's often regarded as the black sheep of the series because the role of Bruce Banner switched between this movie and the Avengers. And I remember seeing this movie for the first time in 2008, and I liked it. And upon repeated viewings, I've grown to appreciate this movie a lot more. The last time I actually saw this movie from beginning to end was in prep for Avengers Age of Ultron. Now that I'm rewatching this movie again, I still think it's underrated. I still think it's greatly underappreciated. But at the same time, I'm starting to notice a lot of issues with the movie that I didn't really think about at first. So let's start off with the main character of the movie, Bruce Banner, who in this movie is not played by Mark Ruffalo, although he was actually in consideration for this movie, but in fact, it was Ed Norton. And I gotta say, a lot of people seem to disregard Ed Norton's take on Bruce Banner. I think it really works. And I think it has to come down to the fact that I actually knew a lot about the Hulk before these movies were coming out. Like Iron Man or Captain America, I didn't know anything about those characters outside of like name and what they look like. But with The Incredible Hulk, I knew the origin, I knew the backstory, I knew some of the core moments to the character. And whenever I think of Bruce Banner, I always imagine someone who's a little more skinny, and Ed Norton in this movie perfectly fits the description of Bruce Banner for me. Through a lot of this movie, you really get to see Bruce Banner be the scientist that he's always depicted as, and I think the opening of this movie is great. Since the Ang Lee Hulk came out just 5 years before this movie came out, at the time it was the quickest reboot for a comic book movie, which would then be beaten by the 4-year gap between The Dark Knight Rises and Batman vs. Superman, and then months later would again be beaten by the 2-year gap between The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Captain America Civil War. But one of the cool things they do with this movie is how they play out the origin story. And the origin of the Hulk is very simple, and the idea to play it through the opening credits is genius, because we just had a Hulk movie, so to play the origin in the opening credits was a brilliant idea. And I even like the first act of the movie, where Bruce Banner is hiding out in Brazil, trying to live a peaceful life, staying on the down low, while also trying to find a way to cure this condition of him turning into the Hulk. It's pretty engaging, and a lot of it is told with very little dialogue, which is cool. I always like a chance for visual storytelling. And when we actually get to the Hulk sequences, they're pretty damn good as well. I'll admit that the CG really has not aged well, and considering how the Hulk would look in future movies, this really doesn't look good. But at the same time, it's better than the Ang Lee Hulk that just looked like rubber, and that was just an ugly movie to begin with, but the look of the Hulk in the Ang Lee movie was just ugh. So in terms of Bruce Banner and the Hulk, they get those two characters right. My only problem with the Hulk versus Bruce Banner dynamic is that whenever Bruce Banner actually transforms into the Hulk, you never really get a sense that Ed Norton is in that character. One of the big advantages for Mark Ruffalo when he started playing Bruce Banner was that he was the first actor to play both Bruce Banner and the Hulk through motion capture, and as I said before, you never really get a sense that Ed Norton's Bruce Banner is in this Hulk, so there's sort of a disconnect between the two characters. But I still think, despite all that, they really get Bruce Banner and the Hulk right in this movie. They would perfect the Hulk in future movies, but this was a good stepping stone. The supporting cast, I wish I could give the same level of praise to. I mean, in addition to Edward Norton, you have a bunch of other very talented actors in this movie, like William Hurt as General Ross, Liv Tyler as Betty Ross, and Tim Roth as Emil Blonsky. I'll get to him a little later. William Hurt is the only actor in this movie that really doesn't seem to be taking it all that seriously, and rewatching his performance in this movie, I'm just like, come on, you are in the movie between Iron Man and The Dark Knight, two comic book movies that revolutionized the genre to a point where people started taking these movies more seriously, and you just seem to be bored throughout this entire film. I mean, to be fair, there isn't that much to his character that he could work with, because he pretty much plays the authoritative general who's going after the good guy, and it just doesn't really provide a lot of acting range from him. And as for Liv Tyler, She's not good in this movie at all. I mean, to be totally honest, I don't think Liv Tyler is a terrible actress, but even within movies like Lord of the Rings, she's not a tremendous actress. But in terms of her interpretation of Betty Ross, she's just very soft-spoken throughout the entire movie. She talks to everyone as if they're a child. She's trying to just be as kind and gentle as possible. And the chemistry between her and Ed Norton just doesn't work. And that's one of the things I've always remembered from the comics, because I actually read a couple of Hulk comics back in the day, and I always remember that the Betty Ross and Bruce Banner relationship was strong because they were both scientists, they both had a connection, and it just made the relationship more painful knowing that they couldn't be together, especially considering that her father is constantly chasing after Bruce Banner. So if there's anything that's going to make me give this romance a pass, it's going to be my prior knowledge than just what I remember from the comics. But this is a movie, and it has to stand on its own, and I can't depend on the source material. And just as a movie, it doesn't work. Although, I will admit, there is one gorgeous scene in this movie where Liv Tyler's soft-spoken attitude actually works. And that's the scene in the mountains during the rain, where the Hulk is trying to protect Betty Ross from the lightning. He's just getting all angry, he's fierce, like he is raged out because he's the Hulk, and Betty's trying to calm him down. I like that moment because it just reminds me of Peter Jackson's King Kong, where Beauty is trying to tame the beast because she knows that there's something human inside of him. I mean, for the Hulk, it's quite literally. But I actually think that scene works very well. Now, let's talk about Tim Roth as Emil Blonsky. Despite everything I said about me being familiar with the Hulk before this movie came out, I'm actually not too familiar with this character. But from what I do know, he is supposed to be a Russian. And one of the first things they say in this movie as soon as they introduce Emil Blonsky is he was born in Russia but raised in England. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I would prefer the movies to be comic accurate, because to make Emil Blonsky Russian with a Russian accent isn't too hard. But okay, I'll let it pass. What I can't let pass, however, is his motivation. Throughout the entire movie, Emil Blonsky just seems like an angry guy who decides to try to take part in a new phase of the super soldier serum just so he can have the energy to battle the Hulk. And the action scene where he's actually fighting the Hulk as Emil Blonsky and is just dodging him left and right is pretty cool. But in terms of the character, it just seems like he got more obsessed with power as the movie went on. Like, he wanted more of the super soldier serum. He wanted to have the same power that Bruce Banner has whenever he turns into the Hulk. Although if you watch this movie in chronological order like I'm doing right now, this whole scenario is a nice callback to the first Avenger, where Dr. Erskine talks about how if a bad person takes the super soldier serum, it'll just amplify everything that's bad about them and make them worse. So thinking about that, it's a little nice nod, but even then, that just doesn't really lead to a very well-written villain. I mean, he's no Whiplash. I think Tim Roth in this movie has more charisma than Mickey Rourke did, but there just wasn't a whole lot to this character, and the Abomination is okay. I mean, the big action scene in Harlem between him and the Hulk is badass. And I have to admit this, when I saw this movie for the first time in theaters, and the Hulk took that cop car, smashed it in two, and turned him into boxing gloves, I geeked out like crazy, because I was a huge fan of the Hulk Ultimate Destruction video game, where you could take cars and turn them into boxing gloves. So when the Hulk did that in this movie, I lost it. That little moment made me so happy. And hearing the Hulk actually say Hulk smash was a pretty geeky moment too that I loved. The action scene as a whole in the end is pretty fun, but again, the CGI definitely does not hold up. In fact, there are a few points in this movie where Hulk and Abomination move a little too quick to the point where you don't believe they're there. One of the big traits that the MCU has become famous for is its sense of humor. This movie doesn't really have that, but I can forgive it because the Hulk is more of a tragic character. When you look at Bruce Banner, he's constantly on the run, and it just doesn't really lend itself to some well-thought-out humor. There are a few parts in this movie where they try to inject humor, and I don't remember them working too well. To be honest, the drama actually works a lot better. And I'm solely talking about the first act of the movie, where Bruce Banner's in Brazil, because after that, up until the big Harlem fight, the movie's just kind of sluggish and not too interesting. I didn't hate it, and whenever the Hulk popped up on screen, I was into it, but it just really drags the movie down, and you'll start to lose interest. But again, I think the Harlem fight between Hulk and Abomination saves the movie. So is The Incredible Hulk as great as I remember it? No. Is it a terrible movie? I don't think so, not at all. I wouldn't even say it's a bad movie, because all the stuff that I really like about the movie, I still like. I will continue to defend the first act of the movie, Ed Norton as Bruce Banner, and all the Hulk sequences. But everything else is just kinda lackluster. I can't compare it to the Ang Lee Hulk because I don't remember that movie too well, but I still think it's one of the more underappreciated comic book movies out there. It's good, but I don't think it's anywhere near great, because unfortunately this movie did have to be sandwiched in between Iron Man and The Dark Knight. And it just didn't stand a chance. Like, there was no way The Incredible Hulk was going to be as good as Iron Man or The Dark Knight. But still, I think this movie is fun. It's got some great character moments with Bruce Banner. Ed Norton still does a really great job. And it's worth checking out at the very least once. And just like with the Terrence Howard situation, while I prefer Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner than Ed Norton, it would have been interesting to see how the rest of this series played out if Ed Norton had continued to play Bruce Banner. But we'll never see that. On the flip side, we did get a much better Bruce Banner with Mark Ruffalo, so there's that. Now, as for the Stan Lee cameo, he's pretty much playing an old man who drinks the soda from Brazil that came from the bottling plant that Bruce Banner worked at, but unfortunately some of Banner's gamma-radiated blood got into the soda. Stan Lee just really feels the power, and that's what gives General Ross the idea that Banner's in Brazil. As for the stinger of the movie, it's not really worth watching. In fact, Marvel actually retconned this stinger and reworked it into the Marvel one-shot The Consultant. So in the actual movie, Robert Downey Jr. cameos as Tony Stark, goes into the bar that General Ross is at as he's just smoking a cigar and drinking beer in defeat, and Stark talks to Ross about the Avengers initiative. Now, in this Marvel one-shot The Consultant, Phil Coulson, once again played by Clark Gregg, and another S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, Jasper Sitwell, that little Hydra snake, are in a cafe talking about how General Ross and the World Security Council want Emil Blonsky on the team rather than Bruce Banner, because they consider Blonsky a hero while they consider Banner the reason the whole Harlem incident even took place, which I don't know how blind you have to be to see that. I mean, hell, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, could even see that that's bullshit, and he's literally blind. And if you remember from Iron Man 2, Tony Stark was not recommended to join the Avengers and just became a consultant, so Coulson and Sitwell send Tony Stark to Ross to pretty much sabotage the conversation, to the point where Blonsky just stays in jail. It's a fun short, and I wish Marvel would continue doing these one-shots. Maybe on Disney Plus they'll continue doing these, because I thought those one-shots were really creative and fun. So that's the only way I'd ever recommend watching the stinger for The Incredible Hulk, is through that one-shot, because when you watch it in the actual movie, it leads up to nothing. So that's my re-review for The Incredible Hulk. Definitely not as bad as people make it out to be, but not as great as I remember it. Next up, we're going to be talking about the mighty Avenger, Thor. Now I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are on The Incredible Hulk. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Has your opinion changed? Do you like it more than you did back then, or do you like it less than you did back then? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and of course leave a comment. Don't forget to support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.